Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly complex and utterly captivating world of penguin existence, those flightless Antarctic survivors who waddle through blizzards and dive into freezing waters to build something extraordinary. While most people think penguin life is just cute and simple, the truth is these birds live with more purpose and community than most humans ever will. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You emerge from your egg like someone falling out of a broken elevator, unexpected, slightly damp, and immediately questioning your life choices. The world greets you with a gentle slap of Antarctic air that feels like someone opened every freezer door in existence simultaneously, just for you. Welcome to summer in Antarctica, where summer is a generous term that basically means only moderately lethal weather. The temperature hovers around a balmy -15 degrees Celsius, which your newly hatched brain interprets as, why does everything hurt? You're perched on an ice shelf that stretches toward infinity in every direction, creaking and groaning like an old wooden ship that's seen better centuries. Occasionally, it makes a sound like someone cracking their knuckles, except the knuckles are the size of city blocks. Your timing, as it turns out, is impeccable, in the way that stepping in a puddle right after putting on clean socks is impeccable. You've chosen to crack your way into existence during what the locals call a mild blizzard, which is Antarctic. Speak for, the air is now made entirely of horizontal ice needles. The wind carries snowflakes that seem personally offended by your presence, pelting you with the enthusiasm of overexcited confetti at a surprise party nobody wanted. Blinking your brand new eyes, you take in your surroundings with the confused wonder of someone who's just woken up in a foreign country where everyone speaks a language that consists entirely of honking sounds. The landscape stretches endlessly in shades of white that have names you'll never learn. There's blinding white, slightly less blinding white, white with a hint of grey that might be a cloud, and white that makes you question whether colours were ever real. Around you, as far as your tiny eyes can see, stand roughly 10,000 emperor penguins. They look exactly like bowling pins that learned to walk upright and decided to attend a very formal dinner party, except someone forgot to tell them where the dinner was. Each one is perfectly identical from a distance, black back, white front, dignified posture, like they're all wearing the same tuxedo from a rental shop that only stocks one size. Penguin. The colony spreads across the ice in what appears to be organized chaos. Groups cluster together with the purposeful randomness of people at a networking event who don't quite know why they're there, but are committed to making the best of it. Some penguins stand perfectly still, looking contemplative. Others waddle around with the determined gait of someone who's late for an appointment they can't quite remember. A few are engaged in what appears to be intense conversation, heads tilted toward each other, honking in tones that suggest they're either discussing the weather or debating the existential nature of fish. Your father stands above you like a feathered monument to exhaustion. For the past 2 months, he's been balancing you well. Your egg version on his feet, covered by a warm flap of belly skin called a brood pouch, which sounds cozy but has apparently been the penguin equivalent of wearing a weighted vest while standing on a subway platform during rush hour. For 2 months, without sitting down or eating, he looks down at you with an expression that manages to convey both profound love and the sort of bone-deep weariness usually reserved for parents of human toddlers. His eyes have the slightly glazed look of someone who's been standing in the same spot for so long that he's forgotten what walking feels like. You can practically hear him thinking, "Oh good, it hatched. Now what?" Every few minutes, he shifts his weight from one foot to the other with the careful precision of someone balancing a Ming vase on a tightrope during an earthquake. The movement is so subtle that if you weren't literally sitting on his feet, you'd miss it entirely. It's the penguin equivalent of stretching, except stretching when any sudden movement might result in dropping your offspring onto ice that's roughly the temperature of liquid nitrogen. Meanwhile, your mother is off fishing somewhere in the Southern Ocean, probably taking her sweet time about it. She's been gone for 2 months, ever since she laid your egg and promptly announced, "Well, my work here is done," before sliding off into the sunset like a tuxedoed action hero. You imagine her out there, diving through waters that would turn a human into a popsicle in roughly 30 seconds, catching fish with the casual competence of someone who's never had to worry about keeping an egg warm with their feet. The wind picks up, carrying with it the sound of 10,000 penguins going about their daily business. It's a symphony of honks, squawks, and what can only be described as the sound of polite argument conducted in a language made entirely of variations on wak. Occasionally, someone lets out a call that sounds like a rusty trumpet being played by someone who's never seen a trumpet before but is really committed to giving it their best shot. You attempt your first vocalization, a small chirp that gets immediately swept away by the wind and sounds roughly like a squeaky toy that's given up on life. Your father looks down with what might be pride or might be mild indigestion. It's hard to tell with penguins. The colony around you operates with the organized confusion of a large corporation where everyone has a job, but nobody's entirely sure what anyone else is supposed to be doing. Some penguins stand in loose groups, swaying slightly in unison like they're at a very slow, very cold concert. Others walk purposefully across the ice, though their destinations are mysterious and their routes seem to follow no logic that you can discern. Every now and then, a penguin will approach your father, honk something that sounds like either a greeting or a complaint about property values, receive a honk in return, and then wander off, apparently satisfied with this exchange. It's like watching a neighborhood where everyone knows each other, but communication happens entirely through a series of car honks. The ice beneath the colony is ancient and thick, marked with the scratches and stains of decades of penguin occupancy. It's like a city built on a foundation of frozen water, except the citizens are all identically dressed and primarily concerned with fish. Occasionally, the ice makes a deep rumbling sound that vibrates through your father's feet and into your tiny body, like the earth itself is clearing its throat. As you settle into your new existence, perched on your father's feet and sheltered by his warm belly flap, you begin to understand that this is your world now. This endless expanse of white, populated by thousands of creatures who look just like your father, all standing around in groups and honking at each other with varying degrees of enthusiasm. It's a world where the weather is always trying to kill you, the landscape never changes, and dinner comes pre-chewed from someone else's stomach. You look around at your new neighborhood, a subdivision of ice, populated exclusively by penguins who seem to have figured out some system that you're not yet part of. Everyone appears to know exactly what they're doing, even when what they're doing is standing perfectly still for hours at a time. Welcome to Antarctica. You imagine a tour guide saying, if tour guides existed here and spoke in honks. Population, too many penguins, not enough fish, and one confused leopard seal who keeps showing up to the wrong neighborhood. This, you realize, with the dawning awareness that comes with being newly conscious, is your life now. Your mother returns from her fishing expedition with the fanfare of someone who's just remembered they left the stove on. One moment you're scanning the horizon for any sign of her distinctive waddle, and the next moment she's there, appearing out of the crowd of identical penguins like a magic trick, performed by someone who's forgotten the reveal is supposed to be impressive. She approaches with a gait that suggests she's either very pleased with herself or very tired, or possibly both. Her belly looks fuller than when she left, which either means she's been successful at fishing or she swallowed something she shouldn't have. Given that she's been gone for 2 months and your father looks like he's about to fall over from hunger, you're hoping it's the former. The reunion between your parents involves what can only be described as a conversation conducted entirely in honks, with occasional head tilting and what appears to be penguin small talk. They honk at each other with the enthusiasm of people comparing grocery lists. Except the grocery list consists entirely of fish and more fish, and maybe some krill if we're feeling fancy. Every few hours, the wind shifts direction, causing a wave of subtle reorganization throughout the colony. Penguins adjust their positions with the practiced ease of people who've learned to read weather patterns like a language. They lean into the wind or turn their backs to it, cluster together or spread out, all without seeming to consciously decide to do so. You attempt to participate in these adjustments, but your efforts at weather-appropriate positioning mostly involve falling over in whichever direction the wind pushes you. Your mother compensates by shifting her stance to account for your complete lack of balance, displaying the sort of parental reflexes that suggest she's already calculating how long it will be before you stop being a liability to local stability. The other chicks in your immediate vicinity seem to have mastered the art of looking like miniature versions of their parents, despite being grey fluffballs rather than sleek tuxedo-wearing adults. They stand with the sort of dignity that suggests they understand something about penguin society that you've missed entirely. When you attempt to mimic their posture, you mostly succeed in looking like a grey cotton ball that's been slightly deflated and is trying very hard to be taken seriously. The effect is not dignified. Other chicks glance at you with expressions that might be sympathy or might be the penguin equivalent of second-hand embarrassment. Attempting to blend in with the crowd when you're a grey fluffball among sleek adults is like trying to inconspicuously attend a black-tie dinner while wearing pajamas. Everyone's too polite to stare directly, but you can feel the subtle awareness that you don't quite fit the local aesthetic standards yet. Your mother seems unconcerned by your obvious social awkwardness, which is either a sign of maternal confidence or evidence that penguin standards for chick behavior are refreshingly low. She continues to feed you regurgitated fish soup and shield you from the wind, with the sort of casual competence that suggests she's done this before and knows it will all work out eventually. As your first day in the colony winds down, you begin to understand that this is a community built on the shared understanding that survival requires cooperation, even when nobody's entirely sure what they're cooperating on. Everyone knows their role: stand here, honk there, share warmth, protect chicks, catch fish, even if the larger purpose remains mysteriously unclear. The Antarctic summer light never quite goes away, just dims to a pale gold that makes everything look like it's being lit by a lamp with a dying bulb. The colony settles into evening routines that involve a lot of shifting positions and quiet honking, like a neighborhood where everyone goes to bed at slightly different times, but nobody wants to be the last one awake. You fall asleep pressed against your mother's warm belly, surrounded by the sounds of 10,000 penguins breathing, shifting, and occasionally honking in their sleep. It's the sound of a community that's figured out how to survive in a place that's actively trying to kill them, one day at a time. This, you realize as consciousness fades, is home. You emerge from your egg like someone falling out of a broken elevator, unexpected, slightly damp, and immediately questioning your life choices. The world greets you with a gentle slap of Antarctic air that feels like someone opened every freezer door in existence simultaneously, just for you. Welcome to summer in Antarctica, where summer is a generous term that basically means only moderately lethal weather. The temperature hovers around a balmy -15 degrees Celsius, which your newly hatched brain interprets as, why does everything hurt? You're perched on an ice shelf that stretches toward infinity in every direction, creaking and groaning like an old wooden ship that's seen better centuries. Occasionally, it makes a sound like someone cracking their knuckles, except the knuckles are the size of city blocks. Your timing, as it turns out, is impeccable, in the way that stepping in a puddle right after putting on clean socks is impeccable. You've chosen to crack your way into existence during what the locals call a mild blizzard, which is Antarctic. Speak for, the air is now made entirely of horizontal ice needles. The wind carries snowflakes that seem personally offended by your presence, pelting you with the enthusiasm of overexcited confetti at a surprise party nobody wanted. Your father, meanwhile, looks at your mother with the expression of someone who's been holding in a bathroom emergency for 2 months. He performs a complex maneuver that involves carefully transferring you from his feet to hers, while maintaining the sort of precision usually reserved for bomb disposal. You get passed between them like a slightly warm, very important package that nobody wants to drop. Your mother settles you onto her feet with the practiced efficiency of someone who's done this before, though you suspect before was exactly once, with your older sibling, who's now somewhere in the crowd looking dignified and pretending they don't know you. The warmth of her brood pouch envelops you like a heated sleeping bag, and for the first time since hatching, you stop feeling like your bones are made of ice. Then comes breakfast. Your mother leans down and opens her beak, revealing the penguin equivalent of a to-go container. What emerges is fish soup that's been pre-chewed, pre-digested, and stored in her throat for the journey home. It's served at body temperature, which is to say, exactly the temperature of someone else's mouth, and it comes with a side of maternal love and a lingering aftertaste of ocean. 5-star dining, this is not. The feeding process involves your mother regurgitating partially digested fish directly into your mouth, which sounds significantly less appetizing than it actually is when you're small, hungry, and operating on instincts that haven't yet developed opinions about food presentation. Your brain, still running on basic survival software, registers this as warm, nutritious, and, not trying to kill me, which makes it the best meal you've ever had by default. As you eat, you become aware of the broader social dynamics of your new neighborhood. The colony stretches in every direction, a city of penguins that operates according to rules you don't yet understand. It's like being dropped into the middle of a very large, very cold cocktail party where everyone knows each other and you're the only one who doesn't know the dress code. The penguins around you move with purpose that seems both urgent and completely random. Some stand in tight groups, swaying in unison like they're performing a very slow group meditation. Others walk across the ice with the determined stride of commuters who know exactly where they're going, even though every destination looks identical to every other destination. Occasionally, a penguin will break away from one group and join another, honking what sounds like either greetings or passwords. The social reorganization happens constantly, like a dance where everyone knows the steps except you. Penguins approach each other, exchange honks, and either settle in for what appears to be a chat or wander off to find someone else to honk at. Your siblings, other chicks, scattered throughout the colony, seem to have figured out walking while you're still working on the basic concept of standing upright. They waddle around with the confidence of tiny penguins who understand their place in the world, while you're still trying to figure out which direction is forward and why your feet are so absurdly large. Other chicks your age move through the colony like they've read the manual on penguin behavior and actually understood it. They follow their parents with the sort of purposeful waddling that suggests they know where they're going and why. Meanwhile, you're still mastering the art of not falling over when the wind blows, which happens roughly every 30 seconds. The adults around you spend most of their time looking dignified while secretly having no idea what they're doing. This becomes apparent when you watch them long enough to notice the subtle signs of confusion. The slight head tilts when someone honks something unexpected. The momentary pauses before responding to what should be routine social interactions. The way they sometimes start walking in one direction before stopping and going the other way with no apparent explanation. It's like watching a community theatre production where everyone's learned their lines but nobody's entirely sure what play they're in. They all look the part, black and white, perfectly postured, radiating an air of dignified competence, but if you pay attention, you can catch moments where they seem to be making it up as they go along. The weather provides a constant soundtrack to colony life. The Antarctic wind sounds like the world's largest hairdryer, mixed with someone's disappointed sigh, carrying with it the sense of ocean, ice, and roughly 10,000 penguins who haven't bathed in anything but seawater for months. It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's definitely distinctive. Blinking your brand new eyes, you take in your surroundings with the confused wonder of someone who's just woken up in a foreign country where everyone speaks a language that consists entirely of honking sounds. The landscape stretches endlessly in shades of white that have names you'll never learn. There's blinding white, slightly less blinding white, white with a hint of grey that might be a cloud, and white that makes you question whether colours were ever real. Around you, as far as your tiny eyes can see, stand roughly 10,000 emperor penguins. They look exactly like bowling pins that learned to walk upright and decided to attend a very formal dinner party, except someone forgot to tell them where the dinner was. Each one is perfectly identical from a distance, black back, white front, dignified posture, like they're all wearing the same tuxedo from a rental shop that only stocks one size, penguin. The colony spreads across the ice in what appears to be organized chaos. Groups cluster together with the purposeful randomness of people at a networking event who don't quite know why they're there, but are committed to making the best of it. Some penguins stand perfectly still, looking contemplative. Others waddle around with the determined gait of someone who's late for an appointment they can't quite remember. A few are engaged in what appears to be intense conversation, heads tilted toward each other, honking in tones that suggest they're either discussing the weather or debating the existential nature of fish. Your father stands above you like a feathered monument to exhaustion. For the past 2 months, he's been balancing you well, your egg version on his feet, covered by a warm flap of belly skin called a brood pouch, which sounds cozy, but has apparently been the penguin equivalent of wearing a weighted vest while standing on a subway platform during rush hour for 2 months, without sitting down or eating. He looks down at you with an expression that manages to convey both profound love and the sort of bone-deep weariness usually reserved for parents of human toddlers. His eyes have the slightly glazed look of someone who's been standing in the same spot for so long that he's forgotten what walking feels like. You can practically hear him thinking, "Oh good, it hatched. Now what?" Every few minutes, he shifts his weight from one foot to the other with the careful precision of someone balancing a Ming vase on a tightrope during an earthquake. The movement is so subtle that if you weren't literally sitting on his feet, you'd miss it entirely. It's the penguin equivalent of stretching, except stretching when any sudden movement might result in dropping your offspring onto ice that's roughly the temperature of liquid nitrogen. Meanwhile, your mother is off fishing somewhere in the Southern Ocean, probably taking her sweet time about it. She's been gone for 2 months, ever since she laid your egg and promptly announced, "Well, my work here is done," before sliding off into the sunset like a tuxedoed action hero. You imagine her out there, diving through waters that would turn a human into a popsicle in roughly 30 seconds, catching fish with the casual competence of someone who's never had to worry about keeping an egg warm with their feet. The wind picks up, carrying with it the sound of 10,000 penguins going about their daily business. It's a symphony of honks, squawks, and what can only be described as the sound of polite argument conducted in a language made entirely of variations on wak. Occasionally, someone lets out a call that sounds like a rusty trumpet being played by someone who's never seen a trumpet before, but is really committed to giving it their best shot. You attempt your first vocalization, a small chirp that gets immediately swept away by the wind and sounds roughly like a squeaky toy that's given up on life. Your father looks down with what might be pride or might be mild indigestion. It's hard to tell with penguins. The colony around you operates with the organized confusion of a large corporation where everyone has a job, but nobody's entirely sure what anyone else is supposed to be doing. Some penguins stand in loose groups, swaying slightly in unison like they're at a very slow, very cold concert. Others walk purposefully across the ice, though their destinations are mysterious and their routes seem to follow no logic that you can discern. Every now and then, a penguin will approach your father, honk something that sounds like either a greeting or a complaint about property values, receive a honk in return, and then wander off, apparently satisfied with this exchange. It's like watching a neighborhood where everyone knows each other, but communication happens entirely through a series of car honks. The ice beneath the colony is ancient and thick, marked with the scratches and stains of decades of penguin occupancy. It's like a city built on a foundation of frozen water, except the citizens are all identically dressed and primarily concerned with fish. Occasionally, the ice makes a deep rumbling sound that vibrates through your father's feet and into your tiny body, like the earth itself is clearing its throat. As you settle into your new existence, perched on your father's feet, and sheltered by his warm belly flap, you begin to understand that this is your world now. This endless expanse of white, populated by thousands of creatures who look just like your father, all standing around in groups and honking at each other with varying degrees of enthusiasm. It's a world where the weather is always trying to kill you, the landscape never changes, and dinner comes pre-chewed from someone else's stomach. You look around at your new neighborhood, a subdivision of ice populated exclusively by penguins who seem to have figured out some system that you're not yet part of. Everyone appears to know exactly what they're doing, even when what they're doing is standing perfectly still for hours at a time. Welcome to Antarctica. You imagine a tour guide saying, if tour guides existed here and spoke in honks. Population: too many penguins, not enough fish, and one confused leopard seal who keeps showing up to the wrong neighborhood. This, you realize with the dawning awareness that comes with being newly conscious, is your life now. Your mother returns from her fishing expedition with the fanfare of someone who's just remembered they left the stove on. One moment you're scanning the horizon for any sign of her distinctive waddle, and the next moment she's there, appearing out of the crowd of identical penguins like a magic trick performed by someone who's forgotten the reveal is supposed to be impressive. She approaches with a gait that suggests she's either very pleased with herself or very tired, or possibly both. Her belly looks fuller than when she left, which either means she's been successful at fishing or she's swallowed something she shouldn't have. Given that she's been gone for 2 months and your father looks like he's about to fall over from hunger, you're hoping it's the former. The reunion between your parents involves what can only be described as a conversation conducted entirely in honks, with occasional head tilting and what appears to be penguin small talk. They honk at each other with the enthusiasm of people comparing grocery lists, except the grocery list consists entirely of fish and more fish, and maybe some krill if we're feeling fancy. Your father, meanwhile, looks at your mother with the expression of someone who's been holding in a bathroom emergency for 2 months. He performs a complex maneuver that involves carefully transferring you from his feet to hers while maintaining the sort of precision usually reserved for bomb disposal. You get passed between them like a slightly warm, very important package that nobody wants to drop. Your mother settles you onto her feet with the practiced efficiency of someone who's done this before, though you suspect before was exactly once, with your older sibling, who's now somewhere in the crowd looking dignified and pretending they don't know you. The warmth of her brood pouch envelops you like a heated sleeping bag, and for the first time since hatching, you stop feeling like your bones are made of ice. Then comes breakfast. Your mother leans down and opens her beak, revealing the penguin equivalent of a to-go container. What emerges is fish soup that's been pre-chewed, pre-digested, and stored in her throat for the journey home. It's served at body temperature, which is to say, exactly the temperature of someone else's mouth, and it comes with a side of maternal love and a lingering aftertaste of ocean. 5-star dining this is not. The feeding process involves your mother regurgitating partially digested fish directly into your mouth, which sounds significantly less appetizing than it actually is when you're small, hungry, and operating on instincts that haven't yet developed opinions about food presentation. Your brain, still running on basic survival software, registers this as warm, nutritious, and not trying to kill me, which makes it the best meal you've ever had by default. As you eat, you become aware of the broader social dynamics of your new neighborhood. The colony stretches in every direction, a city of penguins that operates according to rules you don't yet understand. It's like being dropped into the middle of a very large, very cold cocktail party where everyone knows each other and you're the only one who doesn't know the dress code. The penguins around you move with purpose that seems both urgent and completely random. Some stand in tight groups, swaying in unison like they're performing a very slow group meditation. Others walk across the ice with the determined stride of commuters who know exactly where they're going, even though every destination looks identical to every other destination. Occasionally, a penguin will break away from one group and join another, honking what sounds like either greetings or passwords. The social reorganization happens constantly, like a dance where everyone knows the steps except you. Penguins approach each other, exchange honks, and either settle in for what appears to be a chat or wander off to find someone else to honk at. Your siblings, other chicks scattered throughout the colony, seem to have figured out walking while you're still working on the basic concept of standing upright. They waddle around with the confidence of tiny penguins who understand their place in the world, while you're still trying to figure out which direction is forward and why your feet are so absurdly large. Other chicks your age move through the colony like they've read the manual on penguin behavior and actually understood it. They follow their parents with the sort of purposeful waddling that suggests they know where they're going and why. Meanwhile, you're still mastering the art of not falling over when the wind blows, which happens roughly every 30 seconds. The adults around you spend most of their time looking dignified while secretly having no idea what they're doing. This becomes apparent when you watch them long enough to notice the subtle signs of confusion. The slight head tilts when someone honks something unexpected, the momentary pauses before responding to what should be routine social interactions, the way they sometimes start walking in one direction before stopping and going the other way, with no apparent explanation. It's like watching a community theatre production where everyone's learned their lines but nobody's entirely sure what play they're in. They all look the part, black and white, perfectly postured, radiating an air of dignified competence, but if you pay attention, you can catch moments where they seem to be making it up as they go along. The weather provides a constant soundtrack to colony life. The Antarctic wind sounds like the world's largest hairdryer mixed with someone's disappointed sigh, carrying with it the sense of ocean, ice, and roughly 10,000 penguins who haven't bathed in anything but seawater for months. It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's definitely distinctive. Every few hours, the wind shifts direction, causing a wave of subtle reorganization throughout the colony. Penguins adjust their positions with the practiced ease of people who've learned to read weather patterns like a language. They lean into the wind or turn their backs to it, cluster together or spread out, all without seeming to consciously decide to do so. You attempt to participate in these adjustments, but your efforts at weather-appropriate positioning mostly involve falling over in whichever direction the wind pushes you. Your mother compensates by shifting her stance to account for your complete lack of balance, displaying the sort of parental reflexes that suggest she's already calculating how long it will be before you stop being a liability to local stability. The other chicks in your immediate vicinity seem to have mastered the art of looking like miniature versions of their parents, despite being grey fluffballs rather than sleek tuxedo-wearing adults. They stand with the sort of dignity that suggests they understand something about penguin society that you've missed entirely. When you attempt to mimic their posture, you mostly succeed in looking like a grey cotton ball that's been slightly deflated and is trying very hard to be taken seriously. The effect is not dignified. Other chicks glance at you with expressions that might be sympathy or might be the penguin equivalent of second-hand embarrassment. Attempting to blend in with the crowd when you're a grey fluffball among sleek adults is like trying to inconspicuously attend a black-tie dinner while wearing pajamas. Everyone's too polite to stare directly, but you can feel the subtle awareness that you don't quite fit the local aesthetic standards yet. Your mother seems unconcerned by your obvious social awkwardness, which is either a sign of maternal confidence or evidence that penguin standards for chick behavior are refreshingly low. She continues to feed you regurgitated fish soup and shield you from the wind with a sort of casual competence that suggests she's done this before and knows it will all work out eventually. You approach the water's edge with all the enthusiasm of someone approaching a dentist's office. The temperature, when it touches your feet, is so cold it bypasses pain and goes straight to a sensation that can only be described as liquid regret. Your body's immediate response is to suggest that perhaps you should reconsider this whole swimming thing and maybe take up a nice land-based hobby instead. But then, something remarkable happens. Once you're fully in the water after a period of adjustment that involves considerable mental preparation and several false starts, you discover that you're somehow graceful underwater. Unlike literally every other aspect of your existence, swimming seems to come naturally. Your oversized feet, which have been nothing but a liability on land, suddenly become powerful propulsion systems. Your awkward body proportions, which make you look like a penguin assembled from mismatched parts, transform into a streamlined torpedo design that cuts through the water with surprising efficiency. Underwater, you can move in 3 dimensions with the sort of fluid grace that you've never experienced on land. You can turn, dive, and glide with movements that feel both natural and impossibly elegant. For the first time since hatching, your body feels like it knows what it's doing. Your father watches your underwater acrobatics with what might be approval or might be surprise that you haven't immediately drowned. He swims beside you with the patient competence of a driving instructor, teaching someone who's just discovered they're actually good at parallel parking. The underwater world reveals itself as a space of blue-green light that filters down from the surface in shimmering columns. Schools of tiny fish move like coordinated clouds, appearing and disappearing with the randomness of thoughts. The ocean floor, visible far below, is marked with strange formations that look like underwater cities built by creatures with very different ideas about architecture. You spend your first swimming lesson discovering that water has its own rules, its own rhythms, and its own logic that's completely different from the icebound world above. Down here, your awkwardness disappears, replaced by a competence that feels both surprising and inevitable. When you finally surface, gasping and exhilarated, your father honks something that sounds distinctly like approval. You've passed some sort of test you didn't know you were taking, and for the first time since hatching, you feel like you might actually be cut out for this penguin thing after all. The swim back to shore involves more of that surprising underwater grace, followed by the return of your land-based coordination issues as soon as you hit the ice. But something has changed. You've discovered that there's at least one environment where your body knows what it's doing, even if that environment happens to be one that's actively trying to freeze you solid. As you and your father make your way back to the colony, sliding across the ice with varying degrees of dignity, you realize that growing up might involve discovering that the things that make you awkward in one situation might be exactly what makes you capable in another. The colony, when you return, looks the same as when you left thousands of penguins standing around, honking at each other, and generally conducting the business of penguin society with the sort of organized chaos that suggests everyone knows what they're doing even when they clearly don't. But now you're a penguin who's been in the ocean. You're still awkward, still growing into feet that seem to belong to a larger penguin, still figuring out the complex social dynamics of huddle navigation. But you're also a penguin who's discovered that competence can emerge in unexpected places, even when everything else feels like a work in progress. 2 weeks after your first swimming lesson, your parents decide it's time for you to learn the family business: fishing. This announcement comes with all the ceremony of someone informing you that it's Tuesday, matter of fact, inevitable, and accompanied by the sort of parental confidence that suggests they've forgotten how complicated simple things can be when you've never done them before. The hunting education begins with observation. Your father takes you to the edge of the colony where the ice meets the ocean and demonstrates the fine art of fish acquisition with the casual competence of someone who's been doing this since before you existed. He slides into the water, disappears for roughly 30 seconds, and resurfaces with a fish that's exactly the right size for penguin consumption. From your perspective on the ice, this looks absurdly easy. Fish apparently just swim around underwater waiting for penguins to collect them, like some sort of aquatic grocery store where everything's free and the only challenge is remembering to hold your breath. Your father's demonstration suggests that fishing involves nothing more complicated than going underwater, looking around for fish, and swimming back up with dinner. You are about to discover that your father is either a fishing genius or a very good actor. Your first solo fishing expedition begins with the now familiar belly slide to the water's edge, followed by what you've come to think of as the temperature adjustment period. A few moments of standing in shallow water while your body registers its formal complaint about the ocean's commitment to being cold. Enough to preserve food indefinitely, but you're getting better at the water entry process. Your body no longer acts like you're being attacked by liquid ice, and you can submerge without the extended mental preparation that characterized your early swimming experiences. You've learned to accept that the ocean is cold, will always be cold, and that complaining about it is roughly as productive as arguing with the wind. Underwater, you begin your hunt with the confidence of someone who's watched an expert demonstrate the process and concluded that expertise is probably transferable through observation. You swim down toward the schools of fish that move through the water like coordinated clouds, their silver sides catching the filtered sunlight in ways that make them look like swimming jewelry. Your approach strategy involves swimming directly at the fish with the subtlety of a freight train. The fish, demonstrating survival instincts that have clearly been refined over millions of years of penguin encounters, scatter in every direction the moment they detect your presence. You find yourself swimming through empty water, wondering where all the fish went and why they seemed so much more cooperative when your father was doing this. You adjust your technique, attempting to approach more slowly and carefully. This results in you swimming very slowly toward fish that continue to disappear the moment you get close enough to be useful. It's like playing a video game where all the targets have been programmed to be significantly smarter than the player. After several attempts at stealth fishing that result in nothing but exercise and a growing appreciation for how difficult fish catching actually is, You begin to understand that there might be more to this process than your father's demonstration suggested. Fish, it turns out, are not particularly interested in being caught, and they have both the motivation and the mobility to make your job significantly more challenging than it appeared from the surface. You spend the next hour learning that fishing is less like shopping in an aquatic grocery store and more like playing the world's wettest video game on expert mode. The fish move with the sort of coordinated unpredictability that suggests they've been taking advanced evasion courses, and your attempts to catch them result in a series of near misses that would be impressive, if impressive was the goal. Your hunting technique evolves from swim directly at fish to try to anticipate where fish might go, to hope fish accidentally swim into your mouth. None of these strategies prove particularly effective, though you're definitely getting a lot of swimming practice. It's during one of these increasingly desperate fishing attempts that you encounter your first krill swarm. Krill, you discover, are tiny shrimp-like creatures that exist in numbers that make a lot seem like an inadequate description. They move through the water in clouds so dense they look like underwater blizzards, except instead of snow, it's millions of tiny crustaceans with the escape skills of caffeinated teenagers. Your first thought is that krill should be easier to catch than fish. They're smaller. There are more of them, and they can't possibly be as smart as fish about avoiding predators. This thought lasts approximately 30 seconds, which is how long it takes you to discover that krill might be individually smaller than fish, but they're collectively much better at the whole not getting eaten thing. Krill swarms move with a coordination that suggests they're all connected to some sort of hive mind that specializes in making penguins look foolish. The moment you approach a cloud of krill, they perform what can only be described as an aquatic magic trick, disappearing and reappearing in a completely different location with the sort of timing that suggests they've been practicing this routine for entertainment purposes. You chase krill clouds through the water like someone trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. Every time you think you've positioned yourself correctly to swim through a dense swarm, the swarm relocates to somewhere else entirely, leaving you swimming through empty water while wondering if krill have developed the ability to teleport. But persistence, as it turns out, is one of the few advantages penguins have over their prey. While krill are excellent at avoiding individual attacks, they're less good at avoiding sustained harassment from a penguin who's too stubborn to give up. After what feels like hours of aquatic chase scenes, you finally manage to swim through a krill cloud at exactly the right moment to actually catch some. The sensation of successfully catching food is surprisingly satisfying, not just because you're hungry, but because you finally accomplished something that looked simple when someone else did it, and turned out to be significantly more complicated when you tried it yourself. You've graduated from penguin who can swim to penguin who can occasionally acquire food through swimming, which feels like meaningful progress. It's during one of these early fishing expeditions that you receive your first education in predator awareness. You're swimming near the surface, focused on a particularly promising school of fish, when your peripheral vision registers something that your brain categorizes as large, fast, and probably interested in eating penguins. The leopard seal appears like a nightmare made of teeth and muscle, moving through the water with the sort of fluid grace that makes your own swimming look like an amateur interpretive dance performance. It's roughly the size of a small car, except cars don't typically have flippers and an apparent interest in penguin cuisine. Your brain, operating on instincts that predate conscious thought, initiates what can only be described as panic swimming mode. This involves moving through the water with a speed and desperation that you didn't know you were capable of, powered by the sort of adrenaline rush that comes from suddenly understanding your position on the local food chain. Panic swimming, it turns out, is surprisingly effective. Your body moves through the water with an efficiency born of pure terror, and you discover that nothing motivates proper swimming technique quite like the prospect of becoming someone else's lunch. You rocket toward the surface like a black and white torpedo, powered by the universal principle that being eaten is bad for long-term survival prospects. You break the surface near the ice edge and practically launch yourself onto dry land, with the sort of dramatic exit usually reserved for action movies. The leopard seal, apparently deciding that chasing penguins onto ice involves more effort than the potential meal is worth, disappears back into the depths, like a nightmare that's returned to haunt someone else's dreams. Your parents, who witnessed this entire encounter from the safety of the ice, honk what sounds like either approval for your escape technique or concern about your apparent ability to attract predators. You're still breathing heavily and trying to process the fact that something in the ocean actively wants to eat you, which adds a whole new dimension to the fishing experience. But here's the thing about panic swimming. Once you've done it successfully, regular swimming feels significantly easier. It's like discovering that you've been driving in first gear and suddenly finding out what all the other gears are for. Your technique improves dramatically once you understand what you're capable of when properly motivated. Over the following weeks, your fishing expeditions become gradually more successful. You learn to read the movement patterns of fish schools, to anticipate where krill swarms might appear, and to position yourself in ways that don't immediately alert every fish in the vicinity to your presence. You're still not exactly graceful at it, but you're becoming competent in the way that comes from persistent practice and occasional success. Your first completely successful fishing trip, one where you catch enough food to actually feel satisfied rather than just less hungry, feels like a major life milestone. You return to the colony with the sort of quiet pride that comes from finally figuring out something that everyone else makes look easy. But the most significant change isn't your improved fishing technique or your growing comfort in the water. It's the gradual realization that you're becoming an independent penguin, capable of finding your own food and avoiding your own predators. You're still awkward, still learning, still occasionally falling over your own feet when you're on land, but you're also becoming competent in ways that matter for long-term survival. As Antarctic autumn begins, its slow approach announced by subtle changes in light and wind patterns that older penguins read like a calendar, you understand that you're transitioning from a penguin who needs constant care to a penguin who can contribute to their own survival. The colony around you continues its daily routines of standing, honking, and general penguin business. But now you're participating rather than just observing. Antarctic autumn arrives like a landlord asking for rent, inevitable, unwelcome, and accompanied by the sort of weather changes that make you appreciate whatever warmth you can find. The wind picks up, carrying with it the scent of storms that are still weeks away, but already making their presence known. The other penguins begin the subtle behavioral changes that indicate preparation for winter. Tighter huddles, longer fishing trips, and the sort of serious honking conversations that suggest important decisions are being made. You watch these preparations with the understanding that comes from being part of a community rather than just a visitor to it. This is your colony. These are your survival challenges, and you're becoming a penguin who might actually be equipped to handle what's coming. You've learned to fish, survived your first predator encounter, and discovered that competence often emerges through a combination of persistence, panic, and the occasional lucky accident. You're still growing into your feet, still figuring out the social dynamics of penguin society, but you're also becoming a penguin who can take care of themselves. And that, you realize as you settle into a huddle for warmth as another Antarctic day fades into the pale gold light that passes for evening, feels like the beginning of actually being good at this penguin thing. Not dramatically, not with fanfare or lengthy goodbyes or the sort of meaningful honking conversations that you might expect to mark such a significant transition. They simply wander off one morning, apparently deciding their job here is done, leaving you standing on the ice like someone who's just been dropped off at summer camp by parents who forgot to mention they weren't coming back. No forwarding address, no phone number, no "we'll write soon" or "take care of yourself." Just the gradual realization that the two penguins who've been your primary source of food, warmth, and general life guidance have seamlessly blended back into the colony's population of 10,000 identical black and white figures, and you're now officially on your own. The abandonment happens so casually that you don't notice it at first. Your parents have been taking longer and longer fishing trips, staying away for days at a time, and their returns have been marked by increasingly brief check-ins, rather than the intensive care that characterized your early weeks. You've been transitioning from helpless chick requiring constant supervision to increasingly independent young penguin who probably won't die immediately if left alone, without really registering the change. But now they're gone, and you're standing in the middle of Antarctica with nothing but your recently acquired fishing skills and a growing suspicion that being an adult penguin involves significantly more personal responsibility than you were prepared for. Learning that being on your own means making your own terrible decisions without parental backup is a revelation that arrives with all the warmth of an Antarctic breeze. Suddenly, every choice when to fish, where to huddle, which direction to walk when you need to walk somewhere becomes your responsibility, and nobody's standing nearby to honk disapproval when you make obviously poor choices. Your first solo decision is where to sleep, which turns out to be more complicated than expected. The colony operates according to social dynamics that you've been observing but not actively participating in, and finding a space that's both warm enough for survival and socially appropriate for a newly independent penguin requires navigation skills you're still developing. You end up spending your first night alone wedged between two groups of adult penguins who tolerate your presence with the sort of resigned politeness usually reserved for distant relatives who show up uninvited but seem harmless. It's not the worst possible outcome, but it's also not exactly a vote of confidence in your social integration abilities. Your second solo decision is what to eat for breakfast, which leads to the realization that fishing when you're hungry is significantly more stressful than fishing when you know your parents have backup food available. The pressure to actually catch something transforms what used to be practice sessions into genuine survival challenges, and your fishing technique suffers accordingly. You spend most of your first solo fishing expedition missing targets you would have caught easily the day before, because apparently your brain believes that adding stakes to any activity automatically makes you worse at it. Fish that previously seemed cooperative now appear to be actively mocking your technique, and krill swarms demonstrate the sort of coordinated evasion tactics that suggest they've been waiting for exactly this moment to unleash their full anti-penguin capabilities. But you do catch food, eventually, after a fishing session that involves more desperation than technique, but produces enough krill to keep you from starving. It's not elegant, but it's effective, and you return to shore with the sort of quiet satisfaction that comes from solving a problem through sheer stubborn persistence. Over the following weeks, you begin the process of mapping out your corner of Antarctica, which mostly involves ice, more ice, and the occasional confused seal who seems as surprised to encounter you as you are to encounter them. Your territory isn't officially yours. Penguin real estate law appears to be more about temporary occupation than permanent ownership, but you develop preferences for certain fishing spots, certain resting areas, and certain routes across the ice that feel familiar and navigable. The landscape, which initially seemed like an endless expanse of identical white, begins to reveal subtle variations that matter for daily survival. Some areas of ice are smoother for belly sliding, others provide better wind protection, and certain spots near the ocean edge offer more reliable access to fish populations. You learn to read these environmental features like a map, developing the sort of local knowledge that transforms a hostile wilderness into something approaching a neighborhood. Your first solo storm arrives with the meteorological equivalent of a surprise quiz that you forgot to study for. The wind picks up during what seemed like a perfectly normal afternoon, and within hours you're experiencing weather that makes your previous storm encounters look like gentle breezes with commitment issues. The storm brings wind that doesn't just blow, it attacks, carrying snow and ice with the sort of focused malevolence that suggests the weather has personal grievances against penguins in general, and you in particular. The temperature drops to levels that make your usual cold tolerance feel inadequate, and visibility disappears entirely, turning the familiar landscape into an alien environment where every direction looks identical and potentially fatal. This is when you discover that huddling with strangers requires a specific social protocol that nobody bothered to explain during your childhood education. You can't simply approach a group of penguins and insert yourself into their formation without following proper etiquette, which involves a complex series of honking exchanges, positioning negotiations, and subtle body language communications that determine whether you'll be accepted into the warmth or politely excluded to freeze alone. Your first attempts at storm survival huddling involve approaching groups with the social grace of someone crashing a wedding reception where they don't know anyone. You honk at inappropriate volumes, position yourself in ways that disrupt the group's thermal dynamics, and generally demonstrate that emergency survival situations don't automatically grant immunity from social awkwardness. But desperation is an excellent teacher, and freezing to death provides remarkable motivation for learning proper huddle etiquette quickly. You observe, adapt, and gradually figure out the appropriate honking patterns and positioning strategies that gain you access to communal warmth. By the time the storm passes, you've managed to survive not just the weather but also the complex social negotiations required to survive the weather, which feels like passing two tests simultaneously. The storm's aftermath reveals a landscape that's been subtly rearranged by wind and snow, requiring you to relearn the navigation landmarks you'd been using to find your way around your territory. What used to be familiar ice formations have been sculpted into new shapes, and paths that were clear before the storm are now blocked by snowdrifts that require creative problem-solving to navigate. But you're adapting, learning, becoming more competent at the daily challenges of independent penguin life. Your fishing technique improves steadily. You're getting actually decent at catching krill, though you'll never admit how long this process took or how many embarrassing near misses were involved in achieving basic competence. You develop preferences for certain types of fish, learn to read the movement patterns of different prey species, and discover that persistence often compensates for lack of natural talent. Your growing competence extends beyond just food acquisition. You learn to read weather patterns with increasing accuracy, to navigate the colony's social dynamics without causing disruptions, and to find appropriate sleeping spots that provide both warmth and the sort of social acceptance that makes communal survival possible. Most importantly, you begin to develop the quiet confidence that comes from repeatedly facing survival challenges and discovering that you're capable of handling them. The daily anxieties of early independence. Will you find food? Will you stay warm? Will you avoid becoming someone else's meal gradually fade into routine competence? You're becoming a penguin who can take care of themselves. And while this process involves more stress and effort than you initially expected, it also comes with the satisfaction of genuine capability. Your territory expands as your confidence grows. You venture further from the main colony to explore fishing spots that offer less competition and potentially better opportunities. These explorations introduce you to parts of Antarctica that exist beyond the crowded social dynamics of colony life, quiet stretches of ice where you can practice fishing techniques without audience, secluded areas where the only sounds are wind and water, spaces that feel like your own private corners of the continent. You encounter other wildlife during these solo explorations. Seals who watch you with the sort of bemused interest usually reserved for tourists in unusual clothing, seabirds who share fishing areas with the sort of professional courtesy that suggests everyone's just trying to make a living, and the occasional leopard seal, whose presence serves as a reminder that the ocean contains creatures who find penguins delicious. But you're better prepared for these encounters now. Your panic swimming technique has evolved into simply efficient swimming when motivated, and your general ocean awareness has improved to the point where you can usually detect potential threats before they become immediate problems. You're not fearless. Fear serves an important survival function in an environment that's actively trying to kill you, but you're competent, and competence makes fear manageable. As the Antarctic winter begins its slow approach, marked by subtle changes in light and wind patterns that you're learning to read like a seasonal calendar, you realize something significant has happened. You're starting to feel like you might survive to see another summer, which honestly seemed unlikely for a while there. This isn't just optimism or wishful thinking, it's the quiet confidence that comes from repeatedly facing the challenges of independent survival and discovering that you're equipped to handle them. You've learned to find food, avoid predators, navigate social dynamics, survive storms, and generally function as a competent member of penguin society without constant supervision or backup support. You're still learning, still making mistakes, still occasionally falling over your own feet when you're distracted by interesting fish sightings. But you're also becoming a penguin who can be relied upon to survive, contribute to community warmth and safety, and potentially even help other penguins who are still figuring out the basics of independent life. The colony around you continues its daily routines of standing, honking, fishing, and general penguin business, but now you're a full participant rather than an observer or dependent. You have your own fishing routes, your own preferred huddle groups, your own strategies for dealing with weather and predators, and the occasional territorial dispute over prime ice real estate. You've successfully transitioned from penguin chick, requiring constant care, to independent young adult penguin who probably won't die immediately. And while this achievement might not seem impressive, to creatures who don't live in environments where the weather is actively hostile and the ocean contains things that want to eat you, it represents a significant personal milestone in your ongoing project of becoming competent at being alive. Adult penguin society, you discover, is basically high school with more fish and better weather tolerance. The same social dynamics that probably govern every community of creatures who have to live in close proximity apply here, except instead of competing for cafeteria tables or bathroom privileges, you're competing for the best fishing spots, the warmest huddle positions, and the sort of social status that determines whether other penguins honk at you with respect or barely acknowledge your existence. The colony operates according to hierarchies that are both obvious and subtle, established through a combination of age, fishing competence, social connections, and the sort of indefinable presence that some penguins possess and others spend their entire lives trying to develop. The most respected penguins move through the colony with the confidence of celebrities who know everyone recognizes them, while the least respected ones hover at the edges of groups, hoping to be included but rarely invited directly. You find yourself somewhere in the middle of this social spectrum, not important enough to command automatic respect, but competent enough to avoid being completely ignored. Your fishing skills have improved to the point where you're not embarrassing yourself during communal expeditions, and your storm survival abilities have been tested and found adequate, which earns you a sort of grudging acceptance from the penguin community. But acceptance isn't the same as popularity, and you begin to understand that adult penguin social dynamics involve making frenemies other young penguins who occupy similar positions in the colony hierarchy, and therefore represent both potential allies and direct competition for limited resources. These relationships are characterized by the sort of complicated dynamics usually reserved for office politics, except instead of competing for promotions, you're competing for access to the best fishing areas and the most thermally advantageous huddle positions. There's Marcus, a penguin roughly your age, whose fishing technique is slightly better than yours, and who never misses an opportunity to demonstrate this superiority during group expeditions. He catches fish with the sort of casual competence that suggests he's been doing this for years rather than months, and he positions himself in conversations in ways that subtly emphasize his capabilities while drawing attention to areas where others might be struggling. Then there's Penelope, whose social navigation skills are so advanced that she seems to effortlessly integrate herself into any group while making it look like the group specifically sought her out. She has mastered the art of appearing both available and in demand, and she moves through the colony with the sort of confidence that suggests she's never experienced social rejection or territorial disputes. Your relationship with these penguins involves the sort of friendly competition that's only friendly on the surface. You share fishing areas because cooperation improves everyone's success rates, but you also pay careful attention to who catches what and how quickly, because these details determine social standing and future access to premium resources. It's like being part of a team where everyone's also keeping individual statistics, and nobody talks about the scoreboard, but everyone knows exactly where they stand. The competition extends beyond just fishing. Huddle positioning becomes a subtle game of social chess, where getting into the warm center requires not just understanding thermal dynamics, but also reading the complex social relationships that determine who's welcome where and when. The best huddle spots are occupied by penguins who've earned the sort of social status that comes with consistent competence and strategic relationship management. Your own huddle positioning strategy involves a combination of patience, persistence, and careful observation of group dynamics. You learn to identify which groups are likely to accept new members, which penguins are most receptive to polite approach honks, and which social configurations offer the best balance of warmth and acceptance. It's like learning to navigate a nightclub where the dress code changes constantly and the bouncers communicate entirely through subtle body language. The most educational aspect of colony social life is watching the older penguins navigate mating season, which arrives with all the subtlety of a marching band practicing in a library. Suddenly, penguins who've spent months focusing on practical concerns like food acquisition and weather survival begin engaging in elaborate courtship dances that look like interpretive dance performed by insurance salespeople who've never taken a dance class but are really committed to giving it their best effort. The courtship rituals involve a complex combination of bowing, honking, stone gathering, and what can only be described as aggressive preening, designed to showcase the sort of feather maintenance that indicates good health and genetic fitness. Male penguins construct elaborate displays using carefully selected pebbles, presenting them to potential mates with the sort of ceremony usually reserved for diplomatic negotiations between sovereign nations. The female penguins evaluate these presentations with the critical eye of art critics reviewing a gallery exhibition where most of the submissions were created by enthusiastic amateurs. Some displays are accepted with gracious honking, others are politely declined, and a few are rejected with the sort of definitive dismissal that sends the presenting male back to the drawing board to reconsider his entire courtship strategy. You watch these proceedings with the fascination of someone observing a cultural practice that you'll eventually be expected to participate in, but currently find both mystifying and slightly ridiculous. The entire process seems to require a level of social confidence and strategic thinking that makes regular fishing expeditions look like simple recreational activities. But the most significant change during this period isn't the mating season drama happening around you, it's your own transformation, from grey fluffball to sleek black and white adult. Your final molt arrives like getting a tuxedo you never asked for, transforming your appearance from juvenile penguin who's clearly still figuring things out to adult penguin who might actually know what they're doing. The new feathers emerge with the sort of precision that suggests your body has been planning this transformation for months and finally received approval to proceed with the renovation project. The grey down that's characterized your appearance since hatching disappears entirely, replaced by the sleek black and white coloration that marks you as a fully adult member of penguin society. The physical transformation comes with an immediate change in how other penguins relate to you. You're no longer treated as a juvenile who needs monitoring and occasional correction, but as an actual penguin whose opinions and decisions are worthy of adult consideration. Other penguins include you in conversations that were previously conducted over your head, invite you to participate in fishing expeditions as an equal contributor rather than a learning observer, and generally interact with you as someone who's passed whatever invisible tests determine full membership in adult penguin society. This status change is both gratifying and slightly overwhelming. The social protection that comes with being obviously juvenile disappears, replaced by the expectation that you'll navigate adult social dynamics without guidance or special consideration. Your mistakes are no longer charming examples of youthful inexperience but genuine social errors that affect your standing in the community. You learn to read the seasonal rhythms that govern colony life with increasing sophistication. Antarctic seasons operate according to their own logic, where summer means barely survivable, and winter means survival mode activated. The transitions between seasons are marked by subtle changes in light, wind patterns, and the behavior of prey species that experienced penguins read like a calendar. Winter preparation involves both individual readiness, improving fishing skills, building social relationships that provide access to communal warmth, developing the sort of weather tolerance that makes extended storms survivable, and community coordination. The colony gradually reorganizes itself for cold weather survival, with huddle groups becoming more exclusive and fishing expeditions requiring longer ranges as nearby food sources become less accessible. You participate in these preparations as a full adult member of the community, contributing to group decisions about migration, timing, and resource allocation. Your opinions are solicited and considered, your fishing reports are incorporated into community planning, and your presence is counted when groups form for major expeditions or weather survival. The transition from dependent juvenile to contributing adult happens gradually, marked by small increases in responsibility and respect rather than any single dramatic moment of recognition. But the cumulative effect is significant. You've become a penguin whose survival and success matter not just to yourself, but to the broader community that depends on every member's contribution for collective survival. As the Antarctic winter deepens, bringing with it the sort of weather that makes regular survival look like an extreme sport, you realize that you've successfully navigated the transition from juvenile to adult without any major disasters or social catastrophes. You've learned to fish competently, survive storms independently, navigate complex social relationships without causing lasting offense, and generally function as a reliable member of penguin society. You're still learning, still making occasional mistakes, still discovering aspects of adult penguin life that require skills you haven't fully developed yet. But you're also established, accepted, and equipped with the sort of competence that suggests you'll continue surviving and thriving regardless of what challenges Antarctica decides to present next. The colony around you continues its ancient patterns of collective survival, and now you're a full participant in these rhythms rather than an observer or dependent. You've earned your place in this community through demonstrated competence and social integration, and while the process involved more complexity and effort than you initially expected, the result feels both satisfying and sustainable. You've become the sort of penguin who can be relied upon to contribute rather than consume, to help rather than hinder, to survive rather than simply exist. And in a place where survival requires both individual competence and community cooperation, that transformation represents genuine achievement worth celebrating. With the sort of quiet satisfaction that comes from earning your place in a world that doesn't grant membership easily. 3 years into your existence, you've become the kind of penguin who can catch krill while barely paying attention, like a teenager texting while walking, except instead of potentially walking into a lamppost, You're navigating underwater currents and coordinating dive patterns with the sort of casual competence that comes from having performed the same complex task roughly 1,000 times. Your fishing technique has evolved from desperate flailing followed by occasional success to something approaching artistry. You can read the movement patterns of fish schools from the surface, predict where krill swarms will appear based on current patterns and time of day, and execute diving sequences that maximize caloric intake while minimizing energy expenditure. You've become efficient in ways that your younger self would have found impossible to imagine. The transformation from struggling beginner to casual expert happened so gradually that you barely noticed it occurring. One day you were celebrating any successful fishing expedition as a minor miracle, and the next day you were returning from the ocean with enough food for both yourself and a small surplus that could be shared with less experienced hunters. The progression felt natural, inevitable, like growing into clothes that had been waiting for you to reach the right size. But expertise brings with it new challenges, particularly the challenge of establishing your own territory on the ice shelf. By penguin standards, you've reached the age where claiming space becomes both possible and necessary possible, because other penguins now recognize your competence and right to territorial claims. Necessary because continuing to depend on the hospitality of others begins to look less like youthful inexperience and more like social failure to launch. Your territory, when you finally establish it, consists of a section of ice shelf that offers premium fishing access through a natural channel in the ice. Minimal neighbor drama thanks to strategic positioning between two groups of penguins who get along well with everyone, and the sort of wind protection that makes winter survival significantly more comfortable. It's not the largest territory in the colony, but it's well located and efficiently designed for a penguin whose primary concerns are food access and weather protection. The process of claiming territory involves a complex negotiation with neighboring penguins that combines elements of diplomacy, demonstration of fishing competence, and the sort of subtle intimidation that suggests you're capable of defending your claims without being unnecessarily aggressive about it. You establish your boundaries through a combination of regular presence, strategic honking, and the sort of confident body language that indicates you belong here and intend to stay. Other penguins test these boundaries with the casual persistence of neighbors exploring property lines, but your responses demonstrate both flexibility and firmness. You're willing to share fishing access during peak feeding times, but you also make it clear that certain areas are yours and will be defended if necessary. The negotiations conclude with everyone understanding the new territorial arrangements, and life continues with the sort of stable predictability that comes from clear boundaries and mutual respect. Weather mastery arrives with the gradual realization that storms no longer feel like personal attacks from the universe, just Tuesday's commute. The Antarctic weather patterns that once seemed chaotic and hostile now feel like familiar inconveniences that require preparation and patience, but don't represent existential threats to your survival. You've learned to read the subtle signs that precede major weather events, the particular quality of light that indicates incoming blizzards, the wind patterns that suggest temperature drops, the behavior changes in other wildlife that signal atmospheric pressure shifts. Your weather prediction abilities aren't perfect, but they're accurate enough to allow for appropriate preparation and strategic positioning. When storms do arrive, you handle them with the sort of practiced competence that comes from having survived dozens of similar challenges. You know which huddle groups to approach for emergency warmth, which ice formations provide the best wind protection, and how to position yourself to maximize survival while minimizing energy expenditure. Storms become inconveniences rather than crises, problems to be solved rather than disasters to be endured. This weather competence extends to seasonal planning. You understand the rhythms of Antarctic seasons well enough to prepare for winter food storage, to time fishing expeditions for maximum efficiency, and to coordinate with other penguins for collective survival strategies. You've become the sort of penguin who thinks several weeks ahead rather than just focusing on immediate needs. But perhaps the most surprising development is the gradual emergence of leadership moments, situations where younger penguins start following your example, which is flattering and terrifying in roughly equal measure. You begin to notice juvenile penguins watching your fishing techniques, copying your dive patterns, and positioning themselves near you during storms in ways that suggest they consider you a reliable source of survival knowledge. These leadership opportunities arrive without formal announcement or official recognition. One day you're just another adult penguin going about your business, and the next day you realize that a small group of younger penguins has begun treating you as their unofficial mentor. They follow you to fishing areas, observe your techniques, and occasionally honk questions that require you to articulate knowledge you've internalized through experience, but never consciously organized into teachable lessons. Teaching other penguins forces you to understand your own competence in new ways. You have to break down techniques that have become automatic, explain strategies that you execute instinctively, and provide guidance for challenges that you've learned to handle through trial and error. The process reveals that you've accumulated more knowledge than you realized, and that this knowledge has practical value for other penguins who are still developing their survival skills. Your first major leadership test arrives in the form of a leopard seal encounter that requires you to demonstrate the penguin equivalent of poker face while internally calculating escape routes and survival probabilities. The seal appears during a group fishing expedition that includes several younger penguins who've been following your lead, and their immediate response is to look to you for guidance on how to handle a predator encounter. The leopard seal is larger than the ones you've encountered before, moving through the water with the sort of confident grace that suggests significant hunting experience and no particular fear of penguin groups. It circles your fishing area with deliberate slowness, evaluating the situation with the sort of tactical thinking that makes it clear this isn't a random encounter but a calculated hunting attempt. Your response involves projecting calm competence while executing a strategic retreat that gets everyone to safety without triggering a high-speed chase that could result in casualties. You signal the group to move toward the ice edge with controlled urgency, fast enough to avoid becoming isolated targets, slow enough to avoid panic that could lead to poor decision-making. The younger penguins follow your lead with the sort of trust that feels both gratifying and deeply responsible. The leopard seal follows, but doesn't attack, apparently deciding that a coordinated group retreat represents more effort than the potential meal is worth. Everyone reaches the ice safely, and the post-encounter debrief involves the sort of respectful honking that suggests your leadership during the crisis has been noted and approved by the penguin community. But the most significant leadership challenge arrives when you're selected to lead your first group migration to winter feeding grounds. This involves guiding a group of roughly 20 penguins across miles of ice to reach areas where food remains accessible during the harshest months, trying to look confident while secretly hoping you remember the way and that the routes you learned during previous migrations haven't been altered by seasonal ice changes. The responsibility of group navigation weighs heavily as you set out across the Antarctic landscape, followed by penguins who trust your knowledge of routes, hazards, and resource locations. You're acutely aware that navigation errors could result in the group missing critical feeding opportunities or encountering dangerous conditions, but you're also confident in your accumulated experience and knowledge of local geography. The migration proceeds successfully, with only minor route adjustments required to account for ice changes and weather conditions. Your group reaches the winter feeding grounds with adequate energy reserves and good timing relative to other penguin groups making similar journeys. The successful completion of your first major leadership responsibility feels like crossing an important threshold in your development as a mature adult penguin. By the end of your third year, you've established yourself as a competent, reliable member of the penguin community whose knowledge and skills have practical value for other penguins. You've claimed territory, mastered the essential survival skills, developed leadership capabilities, and generally evolved from a penguin who requires community support to a penguin who provides community support. Your daily routine now includes not just your own survival needs, but also informal mentoring of younger penguins, participation in community decision-making, and contribution to collective survival strategies. You've become one of the penguins that other penguins look to for guidance, information, and reliable competence during challenging situations. The colony around you continues its ancient patterns of seasonal migration, weather survival, and collective resource management, but now you're one of the penguins who help maintain these patterns rather than simply benefiting from them. You've earned your place not just as a survivor but as a contributor, someone whose presence makes the community stronger and more resilient. Your territory remains secure, your fishing skills continue to improve, and your weather prediction abilities have reached the point where other penguins occasionally consult you about timing for major expeditions. You've achieved the sort of stable competence that allows you to focus on long-term planning rather than just immediate survival, and this shift in perspective feels like genuine maturity. You're no longer learning the basics of penguin life, you're refining advanced techniques, developing specialized knowledge, and contributing to the sort of collective wisdom that helps entire communities survive in environments that would be lethal for individuals. You've become a peak penguin, operating at the level of competence that represents the best possible outcome for someone who started as a confused chick falling out of an egg during a blizzard. Mating season arrives with all the subtlety of a marching band practicing in a library, transforming the usually practical-minded penguin colony into what can only be described as the stage for the most awkward dance performances in the animal kingdom. Suddenly, penguins, who've spent months focused on sensible concerns like food acquisition and weather survival, begin engaging in elaborate romantic displays that involve more bowing than a formal Japanese business meeting, and more stone arranging than a Zen garden installation project. You've watched previous mating seasons from the sidelines with the detached interest of someone observing a cultural practice they'll eventually participate in, but don't yet fully understand. But now you're of appropriate age and social standing, with established territory and demonstrated survival competence, which means you're officially eligible to participate in the colony's annual festival of romantic awkwardness. Your romantic technique, such as it is, involves a lot of bowing, some pebble giving, and hoping for the best. The courtship process requires skills that aren't covered in basic penguin survival education. The ability to select stones that adequately communicate your romantic intentions, the coordination necessary to perform elaborate bowing sequences without falling over, and the social confidence required to approach potential partners with displays that are simultaneously dignified and obviously desperate. The stone selection process alone proves more complicated than any fishing expedition you've ever attempted. Suitable courtship stones must be the right size, large enough to indicate serious intentions, small enough to transport easily, the right shape, smooth enough to suggest thoughtful selection, distinctive enough to stand out from millions of other rocks, and the right color, which apparently matters, though the criteria remain mysterious and seem to change depending on which penguin you ask. The process involves more engineering challenges than you anticipated. Stones must be selected and positioned to create stable walls that won't collapse during storms. Gaps must be eliminated to prevent heat loss, and the entire structure must be designed to accommodate 2 adult penguins plus eventually 1 small penguin without becoming so large that it's difficult to defend or maintain. You and Willa work together on the construction project with the sort of focused cooperation that characterizes successful penguin partnerships. You handle the heavy lifting and structural engineering, while she manages quality control and design refinements. The resulting nest isn't going to win any architectural awards, but it's functional, well-positioned, and represents a successful collaboration between partners who understand their respective strengths. Egg-laying, when it finally happens, arrives with less drama than you expected. One day, Willa simply produces an egg that requires immediate attention and care. transforming your minimalist stone home into a 24-hour childcare facility that demands constant vigilance and coordination between partners who are still learning to work together as a team. The egg-sitting duties involve taking turns keeping the egg warm while your partner goes fishing, and discovering that standing in one place for weeks is exactly as boring as it sounds. Your shifts involve balancing the egg on your feet, covering it with your warm brood pouch, and then standing perfectly still for hours at a time while trying not to think about how much your feet hurt or how long it's been since you've moved any part of your body except your eyes. The boredom is profound and inescapable. You can't read, can't watch television, can't even walk around without risking dropping the egg that contains your future offspring. Your entertainment options consist of watching other penguins go about their daily routines, observing weather patterns, and thinking thoughts that become increasingly circular as the hours pass without external stimulation. Willa's fishing expeditions leave you alone with the egg and your thoughts for days at a time, during which you develop a profound appreciation for any activity that involves movement, social interaction, or mental stimulation. You begin to understand why your father looked so exhausted during your own incubation period, and why your mother seemed so enthusiastic about her fishing responsibilities. But the egg-sitting experience also provides time for reflection on the transition from independent adult penguin to penguin parent with responsibilities that extend beyond personal survival. You're about to become responsible for teaching survival skills to a completely helpless creature who will depend on your knowledge and competence for their first year of life. The hatching, when it finally occurs, happens with the same casual drama that characterized your own emergence into the world. One moment you're sitting on an egg, and the next moment you're looking down at a small, confused penguin who seems as surprised by their sudden existence as you are by your sudden transformation into a parent. Your offspring, a grey fluffball with oversized feet and the sort of bewildered expression that suggests they're questioning their life. Choices chirps up at you with obvious hunger and complete trust in your ability to provide food, warmth, and general guidance on how to survive in Antarctica. The responsibility feels both natural and overwhelming, like being handed a complex piece of equipment without an instruction manual but with the confidence that you'll figure out how to operate it. Willa returns from her fishing expedition to find that the family has expanded by one small penguin who requires immediate feeding and constant attention. The transition from penguin couple to penguin family happens instantly, with no adjustment period or gradual introduction to parenting responsibilities. One day you're responsible only for yourselves, and the next day you're responsible for keeping another penguin alive in an environment that's actively trying to kill everyone. But the experience feels right in ways that surprise you. The chick's obvious dependence on your care awakens protective instincts you didn't know you possessed, and the coordination required for successful co-parenting strengthens your partnership with Willa in ways that extend beyond just romantic attachment. You're now united by shared responsibility for another penguin's survival, which creates bonds that go deeper than just mutual attraction and compatible fishing techniques. You spend days collecting potential courtship stones, building a collection that represents various approaches to romantic gift-giving. Some stones are practical and well-shaped, others are unusual and eye-catching, and a few are simply the best examples you could find of perfectly ordinary rocks that might benefit from the sort of charitable interpretation that comes with romantic optimism. The bowing sequences required for proper courtship involve a level of choreographic complexity that makes synchronized swimming look spontaneous. Each bow must be performed at precisely the right angle, held for exactly the appropriate duration, and coordinated with specific honking patterns that communicate your romantic availability without appearing overly eager or insufficiently serious about the whole enterprise. Your early courtship attempts have all the grace and coordination of someone learning to dance while wearing flippers and operating under the assumption that volume can compensate for technique. You approach potential partners with carefully selected stones and enthusiastic bowing displays, only to discover that romantic chemistry requires more than just following the correct procedures with adequate technical competence. The first few penguins you approach respond to your courtship attempts with the sort of polite disinterest usually reserved for door-to-door salespeople offering products that nobody needs. They examine your stones with expressions that suggest charitable evaluation of amateur artwork, tolerate your bowing sequences with patient politeness, and then wander off to investigate more promising romantic opportunities with other penguins whose courtship techniques apparently involve elements you haven't figured out yet. But persistence, as it turns out, is one of the few advantages available to penguins whose romantic technique relies more on determination than natural charisma. You continue refining your approach, observing successful courtship displays by other penguins, and gradually developing a style that's distinctly your own, even if it's not particularly smooth. Your breakthrough comes when you encounter a penguin whose response to your admittedly awkward courtship display suggests that your particular brand of earnest romantic effort might be exactly what she finds appealing. Her name, as far as penguin names go, seems to be something that sounds like Willa when filtered through the honking communication system that serves as the penguin equivalent of spoken language. Willa evaluates your stone collection with the sort of thoughtful consideration that suggests genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. She examines each stone individually, testing their weight and texture, and responds to your bowing sequences with bows of her own that indicate reciprocal romantic interest. The entire interaction feels like a successful negotiation between parties who've discovered compatible approaches to the complex business of penguin courtship. Partner selection, it turns out, involves finding another penguin who finds your particular combination of competence, awkwardness, and determination appealing rather than concerning. Willa seems to appreciate your fishing skills, your established territory, and your general approach to survival challenges, while also being amused rather than annoyed by your obviously inexperienced romantic technique. The courtship proceeds through several weeks of increasingly elaborate stone exchanges, coordinated bowing sessions, and the sort of honking conversations that establish compatibility on important issues like fishing preferences, territory boundaries, and winter survival strategies. It's like an extended interview process for a position that involves sharing resources and coordinating survival efforts for the foreseeable future. Nest building begins once you've established mutual romantic commitment, and involves constructing what can only be described as the world's most minimalist home out of rocks and pure determination. The penguin approach to architecture emphasizes function over form, with design principles that prioritize wind protection and egg security rather than aesthetic considerations or unnecessary comfort features. Your nest construction project requires collecting several dozen stones of appropriate size and shape, arranging them in a circular pattern that provides adequate protection while remaining small enough to defend effectively, and coordinating with Willa to ensure that your architectural vision aligns with her practical requirements for egg incubation and chick rearing. The circle of life continues with another small, confused penguin who will eventually learn to fish, survive storms, navigate social dynamics, establish territory, find a partner, and raise offspring of their own. You've successfully transitioned from being someone's offspring to being someone's parent, completing a cycle that connects you to the ancient patterns of penguin survival and reproduction that have maintained this colony for generations. You're no longer just a penguin who's figured out how to survive in Antarctica. You're a penguin who's committed to helping the next generation figure out the same challenges. And while parenting involves more standing still than you anticipated, it also provides the sort of purpose and meaning that makes all the previous struggles and achievements feel like preparation for this moment of taking responsibility for another penguin's entire existence. 15 winters have passed since you first tumbled out of your egg during that mild blizzard, and you've survived enough Antarctic seasons to qualify as a local expert on subjects ranging from weather prediction to optimal krill distribution patterns. Your feathers have developed the sort of sleek density that comes only with age and experience, and your movements carry the efficient confidence of someone who's solved most of Antarctica's survival puzzles through decades of persistent trial and occasional spectacular error. You've become what other penguins might describe as a veteran, though you prefer to think of yourself as simply a penguin who's been paying attention for long enough to recognize patterns that younger penguins haven't had time to observe. The colony's rhythms, which once seemed mysterious and unpredictable, now feel as familiar as your own breathing. You can read seasonal changes weeks before they arrive, predict weather patterns with accuracy that borders on supernatural, and navigate social dynamics with the sort of casual competence that makes complex interactions look effortless. Your territory has expanded over the years to include some of the colony's prime real estate fishing access points that younger penguins eye with obvious envy, wind-protected huddle spots that become increasingly valuable during severe weather, and the sort of strategically positioned nesting areas that require both patience and political skill to acquire. You've earned these advantages through consistent competence and the sort of long-term thinking that allows you to plan fishing expeditions 3 seasons in advance. But perhaps the most significant change in your status is the gradual emergence of teaching moments, opportunities to pass survival skills to younger penguins who think they know everything, just like you once did. These teaching opportunities arrive without formal announcement or structured curriculum. One day, you're simply going about your usual business, and the next day you realize that a group of juvenile penguins has begun following you around with the sort of eager attention usually reserved for celebrity sightings. The younger penguins approach your fishing expeditions with notebooks they don't have, ready to learn techniques that took you years to develop through embarrassing trial and error. They watch your diving patterns with the intensity of students cramming for final exams, copy your krill hunting strategies with varying degrees of success, and ask questions that require you to articulate knowledge you've internalized so completely that you'd forgotten it needed to be taught. Teaching other penguins forces you to examine your own competence from new angles. When a young penguin asks why you approach fish schools from a specific direction, you have to think about variables you've been calculating instinctively for years. Current patterns, light angles, escape route predictions, and the subtle behavioral cues that indicate when fish are most vulnerable to predation. The process of explanation reveals that you've accumulated significantly more knowledge than you realized. Some of your students are eager and attentive, approaching survival education with the sort of serious focus that suggests they understand their learning skills that could determine their long-term survival. Others are overconfident and impatient, convinced that basic competence is sufficient and that advanced techniques are unnecessary refinements that only old penguins worry about. These students require different teaching approaches, and you find yourself developing the sort of pedagogical flexibility that comes from recognizing that learning styles vary as much as penguin personalities. The most challenging students are the ones who remind you of yourself at their age, confident enough to be dangerous, competent enough to be overconfident, and inexperienced enough to make the sort of mistakes that could have serious consequences in an environment that doesn't provide second chances for major errors. These penguins require careful guidance that balances respect for their developing independence with intervention when their overconfidence threatens their safety. You watch your own offspring navigate their adolescent years with the sort of parental concern that comes from remembering exactly how many stupid decisions you made during your own transition to independence. Your chick, now a competent young adult penguin, demonstrates fishing skills that exceed your own abilities at the same age, but also shows the sort of casual disregard for weather safety that makes you understand why your own parents occasionally honked at you with what you now recognize as barely controlled anxiety. The generational cycle continues, with predictable patterns that are both amusing and mildly concerning. Your offspring makes many of the same mistakes you made, despite having access to survival education that you had to acquire through painful experience. They approach their first independent fishing expeditions with overconfidence, ignore weather warnings that seem obvious to experienced penguins, and generally demonstrate that wisdom can only be partially transferred through instruction. Some lessons require personal experience to truly understand. but they also exceed your early competence in ways that suggest each generation builds on the knowledge accumulated by previous generations. Their fishing techniques incorporate refinements that you developed over decades. Their weather prediction abilities start from a baseline that took you years to achieve, and their social navigation skills benefit from observing your own hard-won understanding of colony dynamics. The colony itself has changed over the years, adapting to new challenges that require collective responses and innovative survival strategies. Climate patterns have shifted in subtle ways that affect migration, timing, and food distribution. New predator species have appeared in areas that were previously safe, requiring adjustments to traditional fishing routes and safety protocols. Human research stations have been established in locations that alter local wildlife patterns and introduce variables that previous generations never had to consider. You've participated in the colony's collective adaptation to these changes, contributing both to the identification of new challenges and the development of solutions that draw on traditional penguin wisdom while incorporating necessary innovations. Your experience provides valuable perspective on which changes represent temporary anomalies and which require permanent adjustments to survival strategies. The role of elder statesbird comes with both respect and responsibility. Younger penguins seek your advice on complex survival challenges. Your opinions carry weight in community decisions about migration, timing, and resource allocation, and your presence in fishing expeditions or weather survival huddles provides the sort of calm competence that helps everyone perform better under pressure. But the role also requires patience for questions you've answered dozens of times, tolerance for younger penguins who need to make their own mistakes despite your excellent advice, and the sort of diplomatic skill that allows you to guide community decisions without appearing to dominate discussions or dismiss other penguins' contributions. You've become slightly grumpier over the years, though you prefer to think of this as having developed more refined standards for competence and efficiency. You have less patience for poorly planned fishing expeditions, less tolerance for inadequate weather preparation, and less enthusiasm for the sort of social drama that seems to fascinate younger penguins, but strikes you as unnecessary complexity in an environment that provides plenty of genuine challenges. Your grumpiness is balanced by deep satisfaction with the life you've built and the community you've helped maintain. You've contributed to the survival and success of dozens of younger penguins, participated in the colony's adaptation to changing environmental conditions, and generally made the sort of positive difference that justifies the effort required to survive and thrive in Antarctica. Watching your offspring raise their own chicks provides a perspective on the generational cycles that maintain penguin society across decades and centuries. Your grandchicks demonstrate the same confused determination that characterized your own early development, making similar mistakes but also showing similar resilience in learning from experience and developing competence through persistent effort. But your most significant legacy may be the contribution you've made to the colony's collective wisdom about adaptation and change. Your experience spans enough seasons to provide perspective on long-term environmental trends, and your observations have helped the community distinguish between temporary variations that require short-term adjustments and permanent changes that demand fundamental alterations to traditional survival strategies. You've participated in decisions that will affect penguin survival for generations, contributing to collective knowledge about climate adaptation, resource management, and community organization. Your voice carries weight in discussions about migration timing, territory allocation, and response strategies for new challenges, because other penguins recognize that your recommendations are based on extensive experience rather than theoretical speculation. The final seasons of your active participation in colony life are characterized by the sort of calm competence that comes from having figured out the game at a fundamental level. Antarctic summers and winters no longer feel like tests of your survival skills, but like familiar seasons in a predictable cycle that you understand well enough to navigate with minimal stress or uncertainty. You experience weather events that would have terrified your younger self with the sort of professional interest that comes from having successfully handled similar challenges many times before. Storms become opportunities to demonstrate proper preparation and efficient response strategies rather than crises that threaten your survival. Seasonal transitions become chances to share accumulated wisdom about timing and resource allocation rather than periods of anxiety about adequate preparation. Your daily routines have simplified to focus on activities that provide the most satisfaction with the least effort. You fish when conditions are optimal rather than when hunger demands it. Participate in social activities that interest you rather than obligations that drain your energy. And generally organize your time around preferences that have been refined through decades of experimentation. The peaceful moments that characterize your later years involve long stretches of standing on ice, watching the southern lights paint the Antarctic sky in colors that seem designed specifically for penguin contemplation. These aurora displays, which you've witnessed hundreds of times, continue to provide the sort of visual experience that justifies the effort required to survive in an environment that offers few obvious rewards for persistence. During these quiet, contemplative periods, you find yourself reflecting on the surprisingly non-boring life you've lived. What began as a simple project of not dying in Antarctica has evolved into a complex narrative involving survival challenges, social relationships, leadership responsibilities, romantic relationships, parenting duties, and community contributions that have provided decades of purpose and meaning. The adventures have been frequent enough to maintain interest without being so dramatic that they overwhelmed the daily satisfactions of competent survival. The comedy has emerged naturally from the gap between penguin ambitions and penguin capabilities, providing regular amusement without descending into absurdity. The small triumphs have accumulated into genuine accomplishments that feel proportionate to the effort invested in achieving them. You realize that even the most ordinary penguin life, when lived with attention and persistence, contains enough adventure, comedy, and small triumphs to fill a story worth telling. The challenges of Antarctic survival have provided structure and meaning. The community relationships have offered both support and purpose, and the gradual development of competence has delivered the sort of satisfaction that comes from mastering skills that matter for long-term well-being. The transition from active participant to elder observer in penguin society unfolds with the same gradual inevitability as the changing Antarctic seasons. There's no single moment when you suddenly become an elder, no ceremonial passing of responsibility or formal acknowledgement of your changed status. Instead, it happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the way ice forms at the edges of a pond, creeping inward until what was once fluid becomes solid and permanent. As your active participation in colony life gradually decreases, replaced by advisory roles and observational responsibilities, you understand that you've completed a cycle that connects you to every penguin who's ever successfully navigated the transition from helpless chick to contributing community member. The specific details of your journey may be unique. Perhaps you were exceptionally skilled at locating krill during lean seasons, or maybe you developed an innovative technique for protecting chicks during particularly harsh storms, but the general pattern of growth, challenge, adaptation, and contribution is shared by every penguin who's managed to survive and thrive in Antarctica. This realization brings with it a profound sense of belonging that extends beyond your immediate family group or seasonal migration partners. You become part of something larger than yourself, part of a continuous story that began long before your own hatching and will continue long after your final season. The knowledge that countless penguins before you have stood on these same ice shelves, faced these same howling winds, and made these same crucial decisions about when to hunt and when to conserve energy creates a connection across time that transcends individual experience. Your daily routines shift accordingly. Where once you might have been among the first to plunge into the frigid waters at dawn, scanning for the telltale signs of fish schools beneath the ice, you now find yourself taking a more measured approach to colony activities. Your movements become more deliberate, your energy more carefully allocated. The young adults who once looked to you for leadership in foraging expeditions now seek your counsel on reading weather patterns and interpreting the subtle environmental cues that predict seasonal changes. The wisdom you offer isn't theoretical, it's earned through decades of lived experience. You know the difference between a storm that will pass quickly and one that requires hunkering down for days. You can sense when the fish populations are shifting their migration routes and adjust hunting strategies accordingly. You understand the delicate balance between individual survival needs and collective colony welfare in ways that only come from having navigated these tensions successfully over many seasons. The end, when it eventually comes, arrives as a quiet fade-out rather than a dramatic conclusion. One season, you're actively participating in fishing expeditions and migration planning, your voice still carrying weight in colony decisions about optimal nesting sites and predator defense strategies. The next season, you're primarily observing and advising, still contributing, but from a position of honored retirement rather than daily responsibility. Your input is sought and valued, but the physical demands of leadership, the long hunting trips, the exhausting migrations, the constant vigilance required for chick protection are gradually assumed by the generation you helped train. This transition period becomes its own distinct phase of existence. Neither the frantic activity of your prime years, nor the complete withdrawal that will eventually follow. You become a living repository of colony memory, able to recall patterns and events that span multiple decades. When unusual weather patterns emerge, younger penguins seek your perspective on whether such conditions have occurred before and how the colony successfully adapted. Your presence provides continuity and stability during uncertain times, serving as a reminder that the colony has weathered challenges before and will continue to endure. You spend your final years watching new generations of penguins navigate the same challenges you've mastered, offering guidance when requested, but mostly enjoying the perspective that comes from having completed the journey successfully. There's a particular satisfaction in observing a young penguin discover for themselves a solution you might have suggested, watching them develop confidence through their own trial and error, rather than simply following your direction. The colony continues its ancient patterns of seasonal survival and collective adaptation, maintained by penguins who benefit from your accumulated wisdom, but who will also develop their own innovations and improvements. This creates a beautiful paradox. Your influence on the colony becomes most meaningful precisely when you're no longer actively shaping its daily operations. The techniques you perfected, the strategies you developed, the crisis management approaches you pioneered, all of these become integrated into the colony's collective knowledge base, passed down through observation and practice rather than formal instruction. Your legacy lives not in any single dramatic achievement, but in the countless small improvements and adaptations that make the colony more resilient and capable. Your story concludes not with resolution, but with continuation. The understanding that individual penguin lives are chapters in a longer narrative about community survival and adaptation that extends far beyond any single penguin's experience. You've played your part in this larger story, contributing to the collective knowledge and community stability that will help future generations of penguins face whatever challenges Antarctica decides to present. Whether those challenges involve changing ice patterns, shifting food sources, new predator threats, or environmental changes you couldn't have imagined, the foundation you helped build will serve as a starting point for adaptation and survival. The awareness that your individual story is simultaneously complete and ongoing creates a unique form of peace. You've fulfilled your biological and social obligations, you've contributed to the gene pool, helped maintain colony stability, passed on crucial survival knowledge, and participated in the endless cycle of seasonal adaptation that defines penguin existence. Yet you also understand that your influence continues through the penguins you've mentored, the innovations you've contributed to colony life, and the genetic legacy carried forward by your offspring and their descendants. And in the end, that feels like exactly the right sort of conclusion for a life that began with falling out of an egg during a blizzard and evolved into a decades-long exploration of what it means to be competent, connected, and contributing in a world that demands both individual excellence and collective cooperation for survival. The journey from vulnerable chick to respected elder represents not just personal growth but participation in something eternal and meaningful. The ongoing story of life persisting and flourishing in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The boring life of a penguin, it turns out, is anything but boring when viewed from the inside and lived with the sort of attention that reveals the complexity, meaning, and quiet satisfaction available to anyone willing to engage seriously with the challenges and opportunities of their particular corner of existence. In the end, it's not the drama or excitement that creates meaning, but the depth of engagement with the fundamental questions of survival, community, and continuity that define all meaningful lives, regardless of species or circumstance.